In the year 2025, a single incident compressed into 90 chaotic seconds forced an enter-legal district in Cambodia into a state of collapse. 6 inmates, all of whom had escaped less than 24 hours earlier, were freed again in front of the Svay Rieng Provincial Court. More than 300 law enforcement officers were mobilized within the hour. A nationwide lockdown order followed. By the end of the day, the authorities classified the event as one of the most serious criminal breaches in Cambodia that year. What startled global audiences most was not only the scale of the escape, but the identity of the individual who initiated it. She was a young woman, barely 22 years old, dressed in black, silent within the crowd until the moment she moved. Her name was Fung Jing, and the instant she placed a TT-3 pistol into the hands of an inmate, while standing inside a high-security judicial zone, became a defining image for international media outlets. Those 90 seconds were recorded on a shaky mobile phone, but the numbers behind them were brutally clear. 6 fugitives ran from the courthouse gate. 1 warning shot fractured the order of the morning. 1 young woman confronted a fully armed police perimeter without hesitation. 1 prison van, 1 weapon, 1 opportunity. It took less than a minute and a half for every barrier of protocol, manpower, and surveillance at the courthouse entrance to buckle. The footage spread across Southeast Asia within minutes and reached global platforms before noon. Analysts repeated the same question: how could a single individual destabilize a judicial institution with such precision? The answer, however, could not be found in viral clips or heated comment sections. It was buried in the complicated past of 2 people whose lives had intertwined long before the morning of November 18. These horrifying stories are more than just cold headlines on the front page. They are sharp slices of the darkest corners of human nature, where the lines between good and evil are blurred. And that is what makes them so compelling. To not miss any of the next files, any of the criminal portraits I am about to open, hit subscribe and the notification bell icon now. Because in the world of crime, the truth never gets old. The path to those 90 seconds began 1 year earlier, when Ruan Yi Hao, a figure connected to cross-border fraud and narcotics networks, was arrested during a major investigation. To courts and prosecutors, he was another dangerous offender. To Fung Jing, he was the man who once pulled her out of a life marked by poverty, instability, and relentless exploitation. After his arrest, he left her $100,000, a Patek Philippe watch, and a final instruction meant to sever their connection. Yet she did not disappear as he intended. Instead, she remained in Phnom Penh, hidden from sight, quietly assembling a rescue plan that would place her on a collision course with the law. That is where the real story begins. Long before the world saw her sprint through the gate of the Svay Rieng Provincial Court, long before the image of a young woman pressing a pistol into the hand of an inmate ignited global debates, the story of Fung Jing had already begun to take shape in shadows. She was born into an environment marked by instability, where survival depended more on endurance than on opportunity. According to accounts later provided by investigators, her early life was defined by a revolving door of temporary jobs, cramped living spaces, and a constant sense of being disposable in a society that rarely paused to acknowledge people like her. Those years formed a quiet but relentless pressure that pushed her toward anyone who offered even the smallest trace of stability. When she encountered Ruan Yi Hao, the trajectory of her life changed with a suddenness she had never experienced before. Ruan Yi Hao moved in a world far removed from hers. His involvement with cross-border fraud networks and narcotics groups placed him under the scrutiny of multiple jurisdictions long before his official arrest. Court documents later described him as an individual capable of maneuvering through dangerous circles with caution, calculation, and an instinct sharpened by years of living close to criminal volatility. Yet, within the confines of their private relationship, he appeared to Fung Jing not as a hardened offender, but as a source of protection. He provided her with resources, shelter, and a sense of belonging that she had never been able to sustain on her own. Over time, that sense of gratitude intertwined with an emotional dependence that would eventually push her beyond the boundaries of reason. When authorities detained him in 2024, the foundation of her world fractured. Investigators reported that shortly after his arrest, he arranged for $100,000 to be transferred to her, along with a Patek Philippe watch that held sentimental value between them. He added a final message, imploring her to disappear, to distance herself from everything connected to him. To law enforcement, the instruction was a strategic attempt to minimize her exposure to potential investigations. To Feng Jing, the act was a verdict. It was the moment she felt herself being severed from the only structure of affection she had ever known. Instead of accepting his request, she remained in Phnom Penh under a self-imposed disguise, living as though the city itself had turned into an ambiguous refuge where she could hide from both law enforcement and her own unraveling emotions. In the months that followed, she wandered between rented rooms and dimly lit streets, gathering fragments of information about his detention. Each new detail amplified her fear that his fate was already sealed. According to psychological analysts who later reviewed her case, the combination of abandonment, unresolved trauma, and overwhelming gratitude formed a pattern that often leads individuals into extreme acts of devotion. In her mind, the legal system that now held him was not an institution carrying out due process. It was a force that intended to take away the only person who had ever given her a sense of value. That belief, once formed, began to harden into something immovable. The decision to act took shape slowly, but the moment she committed to it, her behavior changed with startling precision. She sold the Patek Philippe watch, a token tied to her most significant memories, and used the funds to obtain a TT-33 pistol, alongside several loaded magazines. Official reports described her movements during this time as quiet and methodical. She rented an old Lexus from a private owner, removed its GPS system to avoid digital traces, altered her appearance, and began repeatedly visiting the surroundings of the courthouse under the guise of an ordinary passerby. Some witnesses would later recall seeing a woman in dark clothing walking near the parking lot during early mornings, though none recognized her. Surveillance cameras captured a figure matching her description, studying the flow of guards, the position of vehicles, and the schedule of prisoner transfers. Although she lacked formal training, her determination carved its own form of discipline. Every detail became a piece of a fragile plan, built from equal parts fear and conviction. Investigators who reconstructed her timeline noted that the night before the attempted rescue, she arrived near the courthouse under low visibility and concealed the TT-33 inside a trash bin at a strategic point close to the gate. The placement was deliberate, ensuring she could retrieve it without drawing attention. That single act marked the boundary between contemplation and action. Once the weapon left her hands, even for concealment, there was no path back to anonymity. During the hours leading up to November 18, she slept very little. According to later testimony, she spent the early morning sitting inside the Lexus with the engine off, listening to the muffled sounds of the city waking up. The weight of her decision pressed into her chest, yet her resolve remained unchanged. She did not cry, and she did not attempt to flee. She waited for the sun to rise, for the heat to settle over the courthouse, and for the prisoner transport vehicle to appear. Psychological reports describe this phase as the culmination of a dependency so deeply rooted that she believed her purpose existed solely in protecting the man who once showed her kindness. For her, the operation was not an act of violence, nor an act against the state, but a final attempt to reclaim the only fragment of identity she trusted. Whether success or failure awaited her did not matter. Every step she had taken, from selling the watch to removing the GPS, carried her closer to the moment that would redefine her life. When the sun climbed high enough to bleach the edges of the building in harsh light, she stepped out of the car, adjusted the sports cap to shade her eyes, and walked toward the courthouse gate. Her posture was calm, her breathing steady. She moved with the quiet certainty of someone who no longer feared consequences. The plan she had shaped in secrecy was now set in motion, and the world around her remained unaware that it was seconds away from unraveling. The heat rose from its pavement in shimmering waves as the morning of November 18 unfolded over the Svay Rieng Provincial Court. By 8:51, the sunlight had already sharpened into an almost metallic glare, turning the courtyard into a stage where every movement was exposed. Within the dense crowd that had gathered to witness the transfer of inmates, Feng Jing positioned herself as though she were merely another spectator, waiting for routine proceedings. Her stillness contrasted with the restless murmurs around her. Beneath that calm surface, however, her senses coiled tightly, anchored to a single point of focus: the arrival of the prisoner transport vehicle. When the vehicle finally rolled through the side gate, the noise of its engine vibrated through the air like an omen. Uniformed officers moved into formation, their steps measured, unaware that the rhythm of their workday was seconds away from collapsing. The doors swung open, and 6 inmates in orange jumpsuits were escorted out one by one. As they descended, each appeared disoriented by the intensity of the heat, blinking against the harsh daylight. The second man lifted his head, and in that instant, the world narrowed for her. His shaved head and gaunt features made him appear almost like a stranger, yet nothing could conceal the identity of Ruan Yihao. His eyes swept the crowd without any expectation of familiarity. But when they aligned with hers, the fragile structure of her restraint dissolved with startling clarity. Her body surged forward before thought could catch up. She cut through the layers of people with a momentum so forceful that witnesses later described it as an arrow tearing free from a bowstring. Officers were still adjusting their positions, still aligning their steps, still unaware that a breach had already begun. Beneath her shirt, her hand found the grip of the TT-33 with unwavering certainty. Surveillance footage later revealed only a dark blur where her arm moved, too fast for the camera to form a clear frame. The pistol, matte black and cold, emerged into the light as though it had been waiting for this exact second. When she reached Ruan Yihao, the contact between them lasted mere heartbeats. She pressed the TT-33 into his hand, with a motion as fluid as instinct. His fingers curled around the weapon reflexively, though his expression flickered with shock, confusion, and the weight of a fear he had carried since the day he warned her to stay away. Yet the moment for hesitation had already passed. The system surrounding them relied on protocols and response patterns, none of which accounted for the possibility that a young woman would walk directly into danger with such unyielding resolve. As soon as the weapon met his palm, he lifted it toward the sky. The warning shot cracked through the courtyard, splitting the morning open like a blade. Its echo triggered an immediate wave of panic. Screams burst from the crowd. Mothers pulled their children behind parked vehicles. Lawyers, clerks, and bystanders dropped to the ground or fled in opposite directions. Officers struggled to locate the source of the gunfire, and that split second of confusion became the narrow passage through which the entire plan surged forward. Ruan Yihao wrapped an arm around her, pulling her tight against his chest as though shielding her from the chaos he had just unleashed. The other 5 inmates broke into a sprint, their movements fueled by desperation rather than coordination. They scattered across the courtyard like startled animals, guided only by the instinct to flee. Warning shots thundered behind them as officers attempted to regain control, but the panic had already fractured their ability to respond cohesively. The Lexus that Feng Jing had positioned earlier waited less than 130 feet from the courthouse gate, hidden in plain sight among other parked vehicles. The group raced toward it, their footsteps pounding against the concrete in a rhythm that felt both frantic and strangely synchronized. Heat pressed down on their backs like a physical weight, and the noise of the crowd became a dense roar swelling behind them. When they reached the vehicle, the doors slammed open, and the men piled into the back with the urgency of people who understood how little time remained. Ruan Yihao threw himself into the driver's seat. The ignition sparked violently. He slammed his foot onto the accelerator with such force that the tires spun against the pavement, creating a coil of white smoke that twisted upward like a warning signal. For several seconds, the car fought for traction, then finally lurched forward with a roar. Officers shouted, pointing, scrambling to form barriers. But the Lexus shot through the chaos with the momentum of a decision already too far gone to reverse. Inside the car, the air felt compressed, thickened by fear and heat. The 5 inmates in the back clutched their breaths as though the air itself might betray them. Feng Jing sat angled toward the windshield, her gaze fixed on the road ahead, avoiding even a glance at the pandemonium behind them. Ruan Yihao's jaw tightened, muscles straining from the pressure of both the moment and the responsibility he had never wanted her to share. Under his breath, he muttered words shaped by frustration and helpless tenderness. According to later accounts, he whispered, "You are losing your mind, but I still cannot leave you behind." They accelerated down the main road, wheels rattling over uneven surfaces as alarms and police sirens erupted in the distance. Yet for all their momentum, a much greater obstacle awaited them. They had no knowledge of the local terrain. Sve Rieng was a maze of unfamiliar paths, scattered construction sites, and unmarked dirt routes. Their only guide was the digital map flickering on the phone, and relying on it would soon become the flaw that unraveled their escape. After nearly 20 minutes of driving, the GPS directed them toward a dirt road that veered sharply off the main highway. At first, the path appeared passable, though narrow, but as they advanced, the ground softened under the wheels, turning slick and unstable. The car bucked violently as the front tires dipped into patches of mud. Another heavy jolt followed, and then the Lexus came to a shuddering halt. The engine roared, but the wheels spun helplessly, spraying mud backward in wide arcs. Inside the vehicle, dread settled like a stone. They had reached the first true breaking point of their escape, and the weight of what awaited them outside the car was only beginning to rise. For several seconds, the group remained inside the trapped Lexus, as though the engine's frantic roar might somehow pull them free through sheer force. Mud splattered against the sides of the vehicle, thick and dark, swallowing the tires deeper each time Ruan Yihao pressed the accelerator. The longer they struggled, the clearer it became that the car had already lost its ability to move. Panic rose sharply among the men in the back, their breaths rapid and uneven. The realization struck them all at once, the one piece of machinery standing between them and the tightening police perimeter had just failed. There was no choice left but to abandon the vehicle. Doors burst open, and all 6 inmates jumped into the mud with a mixture of desperation and disbelief. Feng Jing followed them, the weight of the wet earth clinging to her shoes, pulling her down with every step. Local residents later reported that they did not initially recognize the group as fugitives. From a distance, they appeared to be laborers or travelers struggling with a stalled vehicle on an unfinished road. One resident, standing far away, lifted a phone and recorded the scene, unaware that the footage would soon become one of the most circulated clips in Southeast Asia. In the recording, the fugitives pushed against the back of the Lexus with every ounce of strength they had left. Their clothes were soaked with mud, their hands slipping against the frame, and their feet sinking into the soggy ground. The wheels spun in place, slicing deeper into the earth as though resisting their efforts out of spite. The vehicle did not move an inch. The sense of futility in that moment was almost palpable. They were fighting a structure far stronger than their own will, terrain, gravity, and time. As they struggled, the police net surrounding Sve Rieng expanded with alarming speed. A top-level lockdown order had already been issued. Border routes were sealed, highways monitored, and every road connecting to neighboring provinces was placed under direct surveillance. Helicopters lifted into the sky, their rotors slicing through the air as they swept across fields and tree lines. Drones operated from above, sending real-time thermal and visual data back to command units on the ground. Specialized response vehicles surged outward in coordinated formations that cut through the outskirts like advancing lines on a battlefield. International media outlets began reporting live as soon as the escape was confirmed. The fact that 6 inmates had been rescued directly from the courthouse gate placed immense pressure on the authorities, who were determined to recapture the entire group before nightfall. Officers on the ground worked with a sense of urgency that reflected not only procedural duty, but the need to restore order after a public breach that had already drawn global attention. When it became clear that the Lexus would not move, the fugitives abandoned it entirely. They turned toward the vast stretches of rice fields that bordered the construction site, hoping the tall stalks would obscure their silhouettes. The ground was soft beneath their feet, absorbing each step with a sucking force that slowed their pace. The air grew hotter as the sun climbed, pressing down on them with an intensity that mirrored the pressure closing in behind them. They moved in silence, conserving breath, their clothes dragging with the weight of soaked mud. Feng Jing stayed close to Ruan Yihao, her face pale but steady. Every sound from above felt amplified. Helicopter blades thumped through the air, sending vibrations across the fields. Officers shouted commands in the distance, though the words were indistinguishable. It was as though the entire landscape had turned into a trap, tightening with each passing minute. By noon, the search teams located deep footprints embedded in the wet soil. That discovery marked the beginning of the final phase of the pursuit. Officers traced the footprints along the edge of a small canal, where one of the fugitives collapsed from exhaustion. He had attempted to hide behind a tree, but his breathing was too loud, his body too weak to blend into the environment. His capture sent ripples of panic through the remaining group of 5, who pressed forward with whatever strength they could muster. The sun reached its peak, casting a harsh white glare across the fields. The fugitives moved in a narrowing corridor of land, forced into an increasingly limited path by the tightening police arc. Drone data guided officers with precision, allowing them to shift their formation continuously. Local residents provided tips as well, reporting sightings of muddy figures moving through the rice fields or near the riverbank. Every detail contributed to the shrinking perimeter. Eventually, the fugitives approached a riverside forest where the terrain grew denser. The tree cover offered a brief sense of concealment, but the police presence intensified. Pickup trucks carrying Special Forces units maneuvered into position, forming the final blockade. Loudspeakers echoed with commands ordering the fugitives to surrender. The words cut through the air like cold steel, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Some of the men faltered. One looked ready to drop his weapon and run in a reckless, unplanned direction. Yet Ruan Yihao did not waver. His focus remained on Feng Jing. His eyes were swollen from sun exposure, his steps unstable, but every instinct he possessed was directed toward shielding her. He kept her low, guiding her behind patches of tall grass or uneven terrain. His choices reflected an internal conflict between the criminal world he had navigated for years and the emotional bond that now overrode his rational judgment. The situation deteriorated rapidly when one of the fugitives fired a shot toward the officers, attempting to break the tightening circle. The response from the police was immediate. Suppressive fire blasted through the rice fields, sending vibrations through the ground. Bullets struck the dirt in rapid succession, scattering dust and fragments of stalks into the air. Within minutes, 2 fugitives were taken down, one severely injured. The dwindling group was now cornered, their path reduced to a shrinking patch of unstable ground. By late afternoon, the sun began casting elongated shadows across the fields. Those shadows stretched over the fugitives like silent warnings. A Special Forces unit maneuvered around from behind, completing the circle. There was no escape route left. The moment felt suspended between inevitability and despair. Ruan Yihao placed himself in front of Feng Jing, raising his arms in a desperate attempt to protect her. Witnesses later recalled hearing his voice break as he pleaded for officers to spare her life. His words carried a mixture of anguish and surrender. When the final shots faded at 6:40 in the evening, the pursuit officially ended. Officers dragged the fugitives from the mud, their bodies heavy with exhaustion. The man once labeled a deceptive figure in criminal reports wept openly as he was placed in handcuffs. Feng Jing remained calm, her expression steady, even as mud streaked her face and uniformed officers surrounded her. Flashing cameras captured that expression, sending it across global networks within hours. What remained of their escape was not a triumph, but a poignant collapse of 2 intertwined lives trapped between devotion and law, each step echoing with consequences that could no longer be undone. When the sun finally dipped below the horizon on November 18, the escape that had once carried the intensity of a cinematic act had already dissolved into the stark reality of legal consequences. The pursuit ended not with a final burst of triumph or defiance, but with the quiet exhaustion of those who had run out of ground to stand on. All 6 inmates were recaptured alive, and the young woman who had initiated the entire sequence of events was taken into custody without resistance. The courthouse that had erupted in chaos that morning stood unchanged by nightfall, yet the system it represented had been compelled into one of the largest rapid response operations in recent years. For Cambodia's judicial and law enforcement sectors, the outcome was clear. This was no act of misguided romance, but a coordinated attempt to undermine the authority of the state. Within the hours that followed, Official statements presented an uncompromising account of the situation. The charges leveled against the fugitives were extensive: organized prison break, illegal possession of a firearm, assaulting police officers within a high-security zone, and discharging a weapon near civilians were only the most immediate offenses. According to legal authorities, each of these charges carried severe penalties. Combined, they formed a structure of accountability, from which there was virtually no possibility of leniency. Furthermore, Phung Jing's status as a Vietnamese passport holder introduced the likelihood of future extradition, raising questions about potential prosecution in additional jurisdictions. Though the images circulating online often framed her with dramatic intensity, the legal framework surrounding her remained grounded in procedural clarity. As the narrative spread across global platforms, public opinion fractured into unmistakable factions. Some individuals interpreted her actions as evidence of unwavering devotion, shaping her into a symbolic figure whose loyalty surpassed rational boundaries. Others argued that such narratives were dangerous, overshadowing the severity of actions that placed civilians, officers, and institutions at risk. Sociologists and psychological analysts entered the discussion as well, emphasizing that while her motives may have been rooted in personal attachment, they unfolded in a manner that violated legal structures designed to protect public order. The events of that morning, when examined through the lens of long-term impact, revealed a collision between personal emotion and the rigid demands of justice. In the aftermath, authorities initiated a review of courthouse security procedures across multiple provinces. The incident served as a catalyst for reforms that strengthened screening processes, adjusted prisoner transport protocols, and expanded surveillance coverage around judicial compounds. These measures reflected not only a response to the immediate breach, but also an effort to prevent similar events from emerging in environments where the consequences could be even more severe. For families of the victims of the crimes associated with the inmates involved, the escape reopened painful memories, reminding them of the fragility of justice and the importance of accountability. There is an undeniable lesson embedded within the collapse of those 90 seconds. Emotional devotion, however sincere, cannot override the structure of law. Gratitude, when left unchecked, can transform into a force capable of dismantling judgment and distorting reality. The final moments of the pursuit, marked by pleas, gunfire, and silence, illustrated the cost of decisions made under the weight of dependence and idealization. Justice, though sometimes slow and burdened by complexity, remains a force that seeks equilibrium. As this case closes and the files return to the archives, the story of Phung Jing and Ruan Yi Hao lingers as a reminder of how easily individual choices can shape the trajectory of lives far beyond their intended reach. The truth may fade from headlines, but it does not disappear. It waits, recorded in statements, reports, and testimony. And as we prepare to open the next file, let this one stand as a testament to the enduring clarity of the law. Justice does not forget.